So I thought it would be good to start off with if each of you can just very briefly introduce yourselves and just tell everyone here which of the films you worked on. Ezra, do you want to start?
Okay, cool. So, my name's Ezra. I created The Sounds of Jordan, which was a film that I worked on with Film London, and I used 16mm film and tape and scratched into it using sort of traditional methods of animation and kind of brought it to light with a more modern kind of interpretation of my culture. So, yeah.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Jessica Ashman. I'm an artist who works in animation, performance, and music, and I directed Daughter, the first film, and I Don't Protest, I Just Dance in My Shadow.
Hi, I'm Mary, and I directed Something More, the film that explored the knife crime epidemic in London. And then the second film was The Divide, which is a film that explored my experience of becoming a single mother.
Hi, my name is Isabel, Glasgow-based, animator and illustrator, and I made Sidesteps that explores microaggressions as well as rehashing some forgotten histories as well.
Hello, my name's Osbert Parker, and I want to say thanks for coming tonight, and I really hope you enjoyed the screening. I am a filmmaker, and I work in all kinds of different kinds of mediums. I work, what films did I choose? I can't remember what I had it. Clothes, Yours Truly, projected on film. There was bits of, I think the piece for Disney, Growing Up. I think that was it.
Yeah, that was it.
Okay.
I think, yeah. Ozzy, I actually wanted to start with you because you co-curated this selection of films that we've just seen, and I thought it would be really interesting to hear from you how you went about putting together that selection, and, you know, are these filmmakers that you've been following their work for a while? Were there any new works that you were introduced to that, you know, surprised you? It would just be great to hear about how you, yeah.
That's a really long answer, but I'll try and make it very quick. I had the privilege of NAG asking me, would I do a program that really kind of featured black filmmakers? And my instinct was to say no. But I thought there were so many interesting artists and filmmakers that happened to be black. I thought, absolutely, this is exactly what we need to be doing. And it's the kind of point of view that NAG was coming from, really. And also, Maggie Ellis is here. She has the same point of view from FLAMIN. And I thought there were so many interesting black, ethnically diverse filmmakers, as well as white filmmakers, but somehow the films just weren't being seen on the big screen. They were being shared in a small kind of way, and I felt as though it really needed to have this massive spotlight shone upon it. And there were so many interesting films, but also I was interested in the filmmaker's process. And I really wanted to, quite kind of like, really a little bit selfishly, I wanted to see them all projected and the conversation that they would have together on the big screen. Because I think they're all really interesting artists that happen to be black, and I think they have their practice in different ways. And that's really kind of what led myself and NAG to have this kind of conversation and then to select these films.
Yeah, because I thought it was really interesting as well in the title of this selection that it kind of highlighted this idea about having a black voice. And I wondered if, Jessica, if I could come to you with this, I just wondered if you could tell us a little about the inspiration behind your films, but also whether you feel like they evolved from an idea of a black voice, if that exists for you.
Yeah, big question.
Sorry.
No, it's good. Yeah, I don't know. I think for me, a lot of my work touches upon like my lived experience and the stories I want to see, and the mixture of elements of my practice. You know, how they sort of channel through me and come out into the world. But yeah, I don't really think about a voice as such. I just sort of think of my own ideas and what I want to push forward. But I do know that I'm essentially kind of creating films for me, or for black women, essentially. And sometimes I will have that specific framework in mind, that specific, the audience of me when creating.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting as well because your film, I Don't Protest, I Just Dance in My Shadow, kind of explores that idea of categorization, racial categorization within animation, but further afield. So is that how, could you tell us a little bit about that work in particular?
Yeah, that's a really interesting project because it was just sort of beginning of my practice changing as an artist, and also a lot of confusion because I just graduated from the RCA, didn't know where to kind of place myself, wasn't seeing sort of stories and ideas and the artists I was interested in kind of prominently, but wanted to connect. So I just ended up contacting lots of black women and some women of colour who work in similar ways to me, and just had a chat, essentially. And the film, I was thinking, is this a documentary? What is it? And in the end, Gary Thomas, and Abigail Addison in the audience, who run Animate Projects, I remember them saying something to me about that this is a project about you. And essentially, it was a project about finding a space for myself. And also the kind of this confessional space with the women I was meeting. And there's value and validity in that existing. It wasn't for anyone except, again, for me, in that sort of sense. So it was a kind of cathartic, investigative, journalistic kind of discovery for myself, really.
Yeah, and Mary, I feel like your work similarly kind of has a sense of catharsis, especially the work about being a single mother. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the process of making that work, and especially because it's quite abstract with the visuals, and is that something that comes kind of instinctively, is it instinctual use of colour, or is it something, could you tell us a bit about the process of making that work?
Do you know, I actually made that film from my flat, and I actually recorded the audio using my iPhone. I have a friend that works in sound, and he was like, you can just use an iPhone to record sound. Like iPhones are really good right now, and I'll clean it up for you. So I decided just one day, just have this conversation with my son. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to go to WOMAD Festival. I'm going to have my son on my back, and I'm going to drag this Bolex camera up this muddy hill just to film him in that environment. And then I think there was a moment when I just found the paintings that he'd done at nursery, and I thought, actually, this would be really nice to animate. And I was exploring working with 16mm film and painting over 16mm film, but then also painting on glass as well, which you'll see there's like oil paints on glass. So it wasn't necessarily, maybe it was a little bit instinctive, but I was allowing the process and my emotions to kind of lead my journey throughout that film, which was, I feel, like a period of kind of self-discovery of black motherhood and the challenges that black mothers face in society, not just in the UK, but in other parts of the world. So, yeah.
I wanted to also bring in the idea of music, because you're talking about sound recording on your iPhone there, but music obviously plays a huge role in a lot of your films. Ezra, I know you play steel pans. Did the music come first? How did the music come about for your film?
Of course, the steel pans is a huge part of my culture, and it definitely inferred the sort of my whole vision for the film. It started with the music first. I'm blessed to know like a great team of musicians, so we came together, and I set up the scenario basically between a child and a father and a mother. So the different instruments, there was an argument actually going on between a child and a father, and the mother kind of came in, and I thought, how can I reflect this? How can I have like some sort of experimental interpretation of that? So I kind of created this scenario. It was really fun to work on, and I think there's just so much about me at this present point, trying to learn about my culture, my history, which kind of informs my work moving forward. So it's just a great journey, and yeah, thought, let me put that together, and it happened to work out. I've never worked with 60mm film before, so new experience, very different to any other work I've sort of done. But I thought, let me strip it back, make it simple, and then work into it. Even now, as it is, I feel like there's so many things I can still work into, and is a part of a journey. So it feels really great to create something which is culturally relevant, and also can be part of something bigger, you know. So
Yeah, what about this idea of disrupting the narrative? Because your film is not, doesn't seem to be like traditionally narratively based. Do you feel like it's still, is there a narrative that you're disrupting in just creating the work, or can you talk a little bit about that?
yeah, I think there's this huge expectancy, especially as a black artist, I would say, to focus on race, or to focus on, it is important to focus on things that are relevant to the time. But, you know, I just thought, let me be present. Let me actually have dialogue with the work, with the actual experience of being experimental, and like creating something which kind of just is part of a free space, you know? So I think that's sort of where the creativity lied for me. I was able to, I was looking at Len Lai's work, and I bounced off of like new and sort of original ideas, and kind of grew from building different processes whilst making the work. And I kind of just focused on the process more rather than the actual narrative. But I think in doing that, it kind of shuns out, and it's obviously different to a lot of things that are shown at the moment. So
Yeah, I saw quite a few nods when Ezra was saying about just focusing on the process. Does anyone want to say anything else in response to that?
It's one of the key things that Nag and I was talking about. Is, okay, how can we do this? What are the filmmakers that are disrupting the narrative in a literal term, not just in narrative structure, but the way you make films. Filmmaking is very expensive if you're looking at working with actors, sound designers, composers, editors, script writers. You know, they need to get paid. So, but there's other ways of making films. You have an idea, you have a feeling, you have an emotion, and you go for it. You try and make it that's raw, that's honest, that has a lot of emotion. And and when we were talking about filmmakers that were disrupting the narrative, it wasn't just about people that were just doing things just from an ethnic point of view. It was sociological. It was also to do with gender. It was to do with identity. It was to do with experimenting and playing and just having fun with it. And I think that's really important, because that's how ideas come. And Ezra is absolutely right. It's not just about your colour. I think everyone has a very specific point of view, and you just have to make work. And sometimes it's very political, and sometimes it has a message, and sometimes it's just fun. It's just really fun to make. And then you find ideas from that turn into something else. So this to me was this disruption was really important in the conversations that we were having.
Yeah, absolutely. And I noticed as well, you know, that a lot of the films, there was kind of looking to dystopian or utopian futures, kind of this idea of world building, about reflecting on our current society through these imagined other worlds. And Isabel, I wanted to come to you with this one, because I just feel like there was in both yours and Jessica's work actually, there was these kind of benevolent characters that were created in these alternative worlds. Could you tell us a little bit about your world building in your film?
Yeah. Sorry. So for me, it's really important to create animations that are at the intersection of sort of blackness, queerness, and being a femme as well. So often, so much is projected onto us, so many fantasies are projected onto us, and we're always victimized or sort of made to be some tragic figure at the end. So I wanted to create sort of an alternative reality where the story that my mum tells, we have a different outcome. You know, it's not a tragic ending. And we have a place where we're together and we do pull each other up, because that is the reality, I think. And also, I just want a space for revenge, just like a place to process all these microaggressions. And I think revenge is such a nice, clean, excellent way to express that as well. So I think revenge is quite a big theme in a lot of my work. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was a very satisfying moment at the end of your film when that like fish creature kind of eats the man. I really...
My puffer fish, yeah.
I enjoyed that a lot. Jessica, could you talk a little bit, because I just think it's interesting that these kind of benevolent, caring figures almost seem to exist in this world that isn't the world that we're in, and I think that's kind of interesting to tease out a little bit.
Yeah, everything you're saying, Isabel, totally on point. I think for me, like utopian and messing around with dystopian and utopian kind of concepts is about finding a sense of home and just a space where you can breathe. So I am heavily influenced by Octavia Butler and all of her writing, and I just think she has this amazing thing of creating these sort of worlds where black women specifically can exist and just live their best lives. So yeah, that idea of, I'm really aware as well of, like, as a black woman, trauma and performing trauma. And for me, I think utopian ideas and worlds is a way of stepping away from that, of just existing kind of comfortably within your own space. So yeah, it absolutely informs loads of my ideas in terms of finding that home. And there's lots of parallels with science fiction of finding this kind of alien kind of creatures and us feeling that we're alien, and those sort of kind of obvious parallels. But for me, it's really about that space of care and holding a space of care, really.
Yeah, I love Octavia Butler, so it's really nice to see see that. And yeah, actually, it would be interesting to know from the rest of you if, beyond other animators, if there are particular figures in other artistic disciplines that inspire you or that you draw upon in your work. I feel like animation really lends itself to collaging together these different aspects from different artistic disciplines. It kind of seems like the perfect medium almost to kind of to be able to bring together these different aspects. And it'd be really interesting to know if in the films, particularly that we saw this evening, kind of what other inspirations you're drawing upon. Anyone want to go?
Art is so key to it. I spent 7 years at art college in Reading and then at Middlesex University, and I was very fortunate when I left. I went into the animation industry pretty much straight away, and I was kind of disappointed with why it wasn't as rich and as exciting and diverse and as challenging as art galleries. There were different mediums, there were sculptures, there was collage, there were different kinds of art, and a lot of animation was very cartoony, and I was kind of surprised by that. So for me, it was about trying to find what you can do. Animation could be anything, and so I was heavily influenced a lot by collage artists, Max Ernst, Picasso, and I thought Malcolm and Norman McLaren, who was a Scottish animator who was experimenting with all kinds of art forms. He was the closest animator to me that I really responded to. And music was a huge influence, like Jordan, like Ezra, and sounds of Jordan, Ezra, and but for me it was a lot of traditional artists actually, and Picasso, because he was so reinventing what he was doing all the time. So that inspired my work a lot when I approached filmmaking using animation to kind of communicate ideas.
Mary, can I come to you?
Yeah, for me it was, before I actually went into animation, I was painting. I was abstract expressionism. I was painting oil paints, acrylic paints and canvas. So because of that kind of knowledge of Kandinsky, and I'm a massive, I just absolutely love Frank Bowling's work. I felt that already was drawing me towards a lot of the abstract animators, people like Oscar Fischinger, Len Lai. So I already had a lot of that and that was kind of informing sort of the work that I was creating, because they move away from this kind of literal representation of the world, and they do that through colour, shapes, and and Oscar Fischinger, was heavily influenced by jazz music as well. So I think that's where the music element is really important in my work. So yeah, I do feel like, and in terms of literature as well, I've recently realised that there's this theme that's just common within my work, and I just didn't realise it until now, and until I was reading All About Love by Bell Hooks, and I was like, oh, actually, the themes of love and community are apparent in pretty much all of my films. And I think sometimes as a filmmaker, an animator, it takes you a long time to realise what your work actually means to you. And I think the audience often realise that before you actually realise that yourself. And that's part of sort of the creative journey.
Have any of the rest of you on that kind of journey of discovering what your work means to you? Is it something that have you come to a similar realisation to Mary, or is it something you're still it's an ongoing process?
Yeah, definitely. Everything you said about care and just that idea of, I think it's interesting as well, animation as a process, and it's so, you have to give so much of yourself to it. And it's quite physical at times, and it can be quite solitary, but it's almost like you're creating this kind of like little sort of nesting space for you. And I think, I too am drawn to stories or ideas which is about a sense of nurturing or building something up, which I think there's interesting parallels, I think, to how long animation takes, I guess. And I don't know, the care it takes as a medium.
It's almost like tending or something.
Yeah, exactly, like a garden, and and which also, strangely enough, my love for gardening has gotten super big in the past 4 years. Gotten an allotment and everything. So this idea of a slow nurturing process, I think it has informed my films and is probably going to continue as well.
I would say for myself is just play, continue to play. I think there's so much to be found within your own sort of mistakes. I love creating mistakes. I love putting myself in new situations where I think I'm going to create something and it's completely different. And it's you reflect on that, you pick up. My sister told me, she's back there, she said, eat the meat, spit out the bones. And I kind of approach life in that way where it's there's so many great things that I'd create, and I'd just take from what is useful and kind of put things together. And before you know it, you're able to develop a language. One of the annoying things about film and animation is that, as you said, is just so slow. It takes so much time. And I think my visions happen a lot quicker than I can get it down. So I continue to draw, and fine art is really important to me. Creativity, creating paintings or drawing. A lot of that sort of informs my creative work and my personal work as well. So play, just play. Just have fun with it, And then eventually as well, you can also use what you've played with, the meat that you ate, to make something powerful. You could, when you mix that with narrative and something powerful, is always going to be more impactful. Great transitions between work, that's something that you can't necessarily just pay someone to do. They have to have that creativity. They have to be very in tune with their present self and be able to just work with whatever they've been given, at the time. So it's
no, totally, I get that. And Isabel, it would be great just ask you this question, and then we'll go to Q&A. So if you have any questions, just be thinking about them. For you, what is this care? Is it play? Or is it a mixture? What's your
I think a lot of my work is born out of irritation, to be honest. I think it's a way of processing that irritation, but it's also, I think I make work that is very speculative, or I sort of reach a roadblock and then think okay, what if? And then sort of work on what if scenarios. And I think films Julie Dash's Daughters of the Dust was a huge influence of how to bring unfold and collapse time in a really interesting way. And I think I'm also at a point where I quite like having hidden meanings that run throughout, that maybe only I know, or if you can interpret it, then that's great. But if not, there's something about the unknowable that I find really interesting. Like, and I think any animation is great, but any time-based medium is so good at sort of capturing or giving you time to think about what that thing could be, or present things in a way that makes you question them and think quite deeply about them, you know? Or like things that don't quite exist in the present, are not quite life death, but like in a sort of floating space. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I like the idea of it being the kind of unknowable, this invisible thread throughout your works. That sounds really amazing.
Yeah.
So I think we have a roving mic, and we'll go to some questions from the audience. We have one just right at the front here. Oh no, sorry, here. Oh,
Yeah, hi everyone, and thank you very much for the films. I'm just reading the script here. The first one, Daughter, talks about transracial adoption. So I was fostered when I was young, but it's only from being an audience of this animation program that I suddenly it dawned on me that it's not people who have literally been adopted. Like the first few films I noticed were all RCA students. I was just wondering what it's like to be adopted by an institution, a white institution, and the racial and the adoption correlations with that, because it's about being nurtured and who you're being nurtured and how you're being nurtured, and what impact that has on your creativity, ability to play, and the therapeutic qualities of your work. But I was also like interested in, because the program mentions British lives, and I noticed there were quite a few films that had a very kind of American, which I kind of responded differently to the African films, because I guess it's an inquiry that I'm not accustomed to on the large screen, whereas the Americanized films, I found them interesting and playful, but I was kind of more emotionally distant from them. So, yeah, thank you.
should we go with the first question first? About being adopted by.
Maybe we could answer that,
Jessica.
because me and Mary are both RCA grads. Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. I mean, one of the films in the program, I Don't Protest, was basically a exact kind of response to my experience at RCA and how I felt in those spaces, which wasn't great, to be honest. Or I kind of felt that, you know, there was I don't know, I mean, I would get really weird questions about my work and my characters, and just idea of like, I remember one of the first things when I used to work in stop motion a lot, and I made a film called Fixing Nuka a few years ago, and they're black protagonists, and one of the first things I got from a tutor was like, why are these characters black? And I was like, okay, why not? But, and just like, it sort of set the that was like my first day, it set the precedent for like my time there. I found it a really nurturing space for me to play, but it was totally instigated by myself. It was me using that equipment, using that space. I didn't find I got that from my tutors, in terms of the sort of stories I wanted to tell and the ideas I wanted to sort of voice, really. Absolutely found freedom in my classmates and the people I met, and I learned more really from them than anything. But and it was really my time, RCA was sort of the precedent that. It was my time after kind of immersing myself in the visual arts world, finding other black women artists, visual artists, and talking more about that process of you know, their work and where they fit in that sort of space. So I don't even think I was adopted by the institution in that sort of sense. I kind of was just in it. And I have a very interesting relationship to institutions now at the moment, because I work as an art educator as well and do workshops at sort of Tate and all sorts. And I find it's very interesting how these spaces and institutions use black people people of colour and queer people, and where they choose to put that value and that weight. And it gives me, it's it's a kind of world I think all artists have to traverse, especially artists of colour, like where you sit in that landscape. And for me, I guess I kind of really dive down into the work and what I want to create, and the people, someone coming up to me after a screening and saying, this really touched me. And even you just talking about your experience of, I need to talk to you, transracial fostering adoption. These are stories that aren't really heard. So I think it's more of connecting with other people rather than being adopted by other artists rather than the institution itself. If that's really rambly, but that answers your question.
For me, I feel like I was quite lucky. I was quite fortunate. I think it was 2010. I was helping a couple of students out on their MA program. And we just used to have conversations. They were both white, but we used to have conversations about there are not enough black people at RCA. You should apply. And I was like, I don't have the money. It's like ridiculously expensive. So so that was like 2011. And when I actually finally was able to go was 2019. By then, the RCA, maybe the tutors had realised there needs to be more support of people of colour. So by the time I went there, I felt like that wasn't necessarily an issue, but I did realise that I was probably one of the very few black students in that space. It was very, very apparent. But the thing is that RCA has finally introduced the Frank Bowling Scholarship, which I think is around 10, fully funded for black artists. And I think that's MA, maybe one MRes and one PhD, so... but yeah, you're right. It has been a very predominantly white institution, and I'm quite optimistic that they're going to address that issue and support people of colour and have a very diverse creative industry within the UK.
I would also say as well, aside from music, especially with visual arts and film, it's kind of hard because a lot of black people are like, well, how can I sustain myself? Is this like realistic? And I used to have that even in secondary school, saying, I don't know any black artists that have a good living in the UK. And that was one of my questions, until I actually done the research. And then I did find people. You have to actively work to kind of seek the answers that you're looking for. I come from an institution where there were only 2 black people, me included, at a drawing school that I went to. But one thing I will say is just being firm in yourself. Before you leave your house, be firm and know who you are, and then you're good. So, yeah.
Thanks. I think I know you had another
I should just
question.
quickly say something about the American side.
Okay, yeah.
I was very fortunate because I work both in the States and here. And so for me, it was finding a community, and it was a community about trying things differently. And I was chosen a lot. I was working a lot with a lot of white, very kind of blue-collar workers with Coca-Cola, Budweiser, Disney. And they were asking me to interpret their scripts because they saw that I could see in a different way. And that was because, yes, I had a British life, that was part of it. British life, these British voices. I had a very specific voice, just like all other artists do. And I was asked to look at their script and look at different subjects and look at the people that were going through these teenage issues, because I had a way of reinterpreting. And yes, colour is part of me, but there's more to me than just my colour. We're so complex, and I think they could see that, the people I was working with anyway. And I think that's also important. So that's why some of those American things were included, because I'm going back and forth, and it's part of my life, actually, even though you didn't connect with it as well. But so that was the answer to that.
I just want to add to that, Ozzy, as well, because for a lot of us kind of getting into animation, you're like probably the only black animator that we were introduced to very early on. So for me doing my foundation degrees, when I came across your work, and we don't have many black animators nominated for a BAFTA. I don't think we've ever had a black animator won a BAFTA in the UK, and that's something I think needs to be addressed because the talent is out there.
Thanks. I think we have time for very quick another question. We've got one just at the back there.
Thank you. Wonderful thing we've seen tonight, and I have found it very gratifying to different parts of my senses, and I say congratulations to you. I also want to say you are ready actually to go into the business world, commercial in filming, but my suggestion, something that occurred to me whilst, from my own generation, whilst I was watching the different animations and the music, was that, for example, integrating different things, ideas for you, the 70s and 80s music of the black musicians and the black, from the black music industry. If it were for you as an idea for thought, and you know, if great musicians who either their music or the lyrics from black music, you can find a way of integrating it into your animation. Because I say this because there are some really relics from the past that fits exactly into some of the things I have seen tonight, and those moments gave me some kind of, you know, it was just touching different parts of my senses. So, I mean, this is wonderful, and if you want to go commercial, I here as an individual can guarantee you of the business sense in it, not just that you'll be reaching out to more people within the society. For example, music from Stevie Wonder, Michael Jackson, different artists going back in time in the 80s, 90s, but that's just it. But congratulations and thank you very much.
Thank you, that's really lovely.
Thank you.
Calypso is my favourite. I play it all the time.
Brilliant. Well, after that comment, I think we're out of time. So thank you. Can we give a big round of applause to our filmmakers?
And thank you,
Thank you for
Debbie.
coming.
And thank you, Debbie.
Thank you.
Yeah.